Every night while you sleep, your brain shrinks. Not permanently, not dangerously, but by enough. Enough to open up tiny channels between your neurons, channels that flood with cerebrospinal fluid. And that fluid does something that should genuinely stop you cold. It physically washes toxic waste out of your brain. The glymphatic system, a network scientists didn't even know existed until recently, becomes 60% more active during sleep, flushing out a protein called beta-amyloid, the same protein that builds up in the brains of every single Alzheimer's patient ever studied. So here's the question that's going to follow us through this entire story. If your brain runs a nightly detox cycle, what happens when you skip it? And more importantly, why did it take us until the 21st century to discover that sleep might be the single most powerful weapon we have against the most feared neurological disease on the planet? That answer will change how you think about every night you've ever stayed up too late. To understand where we are, you have to go back to where this started. Berlin, 1924. A psychiatrist named Hans Berger sits alone in his lab, convinced of something his colleagues think is absurd. He believes the human brain produces measurable electrical signals, not metaphorically, literally, electrical waves that can be recorded from outside the skull. His colleagues laughed at him. His funding was minimal. His methods were crude by any modern standard. But on a quiet afternoon in 1924, Hans Berger attached electrodes to a human scalp for the first time in history and recorded the first human electroencephalogram, the EEG. A squiggly line on a paper roll that proved the brain was electrically alive, constantly broadcasting its own internal weather. Nobody cared. For 5 years, Berger published his findings and was met with almost complete silence from the scientific community. It wasn't until 1934, when the British physiologists Adrian and Matthews replicated his results, that the world finally acknowledged what he'd found. But what Berger had actually done, without knowing it, was hand scientists the key to a locked room. Because once you could measure brain activity, you could measure it during sleep. And once you could do that, everything we thought we knew about sleep started to crack. For most of human history, sleep was considered passive. The brain, scientists assumed, simply powered down, resting, quiet, doing nothing of consequence. It was the absence of consciousness, not a state of its own. That assumption was about to be destroyed by a graduate student working the night shift, watching the eyes of sleeping children. And what he found would set off a chain of discoveries that leads directly to a disease currently stealing the minds of 55 million people worldwide. Chicago, 1953. Eugene Aserinsky is a graduate student at the University of Chicago, broke, behind on his research, and assigned to study sleep in children using Berger's EEG technology. He's watching a sleeping child through a window one night when he notices something that shouldn't be happening. The child's eyes are moving, rapidly, beneath closed eyelids, back and forth, like someone watching a tennis match in fast forward. Aserinsky checks the EEG. The brain activity on the readout looks almost identical to a waking brain. Alert, firing, alive. This wasn't a resting brain. This was a brain in overdrive. He named it rapid eye movement sleep, REM sleep. And in doing so, he didn't just discover a new sleep stage, he demolished the entire passive sleep model in a single observation. Remember that question from the opening about what happens when you skip your brain's nightly cleaning cycle? We're not there yet. But this is where the path begins, because Aserinsky's discovery proved the brain was doing something during sleep. Something active, something structured, something purposeful. The question was, what? Stop. Before we go further, you need to understand something about how science actually works. Discoveries like Aserinsky's don't immediately change everything. They open doors that take decades to walk through. Between 1953 and the year 2000, sleep research moved forward in fragments. In 1983, Francis Crick, yes, the same Francis Crick who co-discovered the structure of DNA, proposed alongside Graham Mitchison that REM sleep was the brain's process of unlearning, clearing out useless neural connections, a kind of cognitive pruning. It was a compelling theory. It explained dreams as a byproduct of the brain deciding what to forget. But it was incomplete. It described what sleep might be doing with information. It said nothing about what sleep was doing with the physical brain itself. That gap between the electrical story of sleep and the biological story would remain open for nearly half a century. And then, in a single year, everything changed. The year is 2012. A Danish neuroscientist named Maiken Nedergaard is working at the University of Rochester when she identifies something in the brains of mice that no one had ever described before. A system of channels, microscopic pathways running alongside blood vessels, that appear to circulate cerebrospinal fluid directly through brain tissue. She calls it the glymphatic system, named after the glial cells that line those channels, and the lymphatic system it resembles in function. In 2013, Nedergaard and her team publish a paper in the journal Science that sends shockwaves through Neuroscience. They've measured the glymphatic system during sleep versus waking hours. The results are stark. During sleep, the space between brain cells expands by 60%. Cerebrospinal fluid floods in. And it carries out beta-amyloid, the toxic protein that accumulates in Alzheimer's disease, at a rate dramatically higher than during wakefulness. The brain, it turns out, has its own sewage system, and it only runs at full capacity when you're asleep. Now here's the part most people don't know. And this is where the stakes become personal for every single person watching this. Beta-amyloid doesn't accumulate overnight. It builds up over years, over decades. Each night you sleep fewer than 7 hours, you clear slightly less of it. Each night of disrupted sleep leaves a slightly higher residue. The process is slow and silent and invisible until it isn't. Until the plaques are dense enough. Until the neurons start dying. Until the diagnosis arrives. The Alzheimer's Association estimates that 55 million people worldwide currently live with dementia. By 2050, that number is projected to reach 139 million. And while sleep deprivation is not the only cause, genetics, cardiovascular health, and other factors all play roles. The glymphatic research has established something that cannot be walked back. Chronic sleep disruption directly impairs the brain's primary waste clearance mechanism. This is the answer to the question we opened with. This is why it matters. Your brain's nightly cleaning cycle isn't optional maintenance. It's the difference between a brain that stays clear and one that slowly drowns in its own waste. Remember that question from the very beginning. Why did it take until the 21st century to discover this? Here's the answer, and it's uncomfortable. For most of the 20th century, sleep was scientifically undervalued because it was culturally undervalued. The Industrial Revolution built a world that rewarded wakefulness. Thomas Edison, who averaged 4 hours of sleep a night and called more a waste of time, shaped how an entire civilization thought about rest. Productivity culture treated sleep as laziness with better PR, and science, which is never fully separate from culture, followed that assumption for decades. The tools existed. The EEG existed since 1924. The questions existed, but the will to ask them seriously, to fund the research, to build the careers, to treat sleep as a serious biological priority, that came late. And the cost of that delay is now measured in millions of minds. Here's where we are today. The global sleep economy, mattresses, sleep trackers, supplements, apps, therapy, pharmaceutical sleep aids, was valued at $432 billion in 2023. That number is not a sign of health. It's a sign of crisis. A world that has to spend $400 $32 billion trying to recover something it spent a century destroying. The Oura ring on your finger, the 8 sleep mattress, the melatonin gummies at every pharmacy checkout, the sleep hygiene articles in every wellness publication. All of it traces a direct line back to Nedergaard's 2013 paper, to Aserinsky's 1953 observation, to Berger's 1924 squiggly line on a paper roll in a Berlin lab. But the legacy of this research is bigger than an industry. It's a reframing of what sleep actually is. Sleep is not the absence of your day. It is not downtime. It is not the passive gap between the things that matter. It is active, structured, biologically essential maintenance. And your brain has been running that maintenance program every single night of your life, whether you honored it or not. The researchers who built this understanding: Berger, dismissed for 5 years; Aserinsky, a broke graduate student on a night shift; Nedergaard, working with mice in Rochester. None of them set out to change how humanity thinks about rest. They were just following the evidence to wherever it led. And it led here, to the understanding that the most complex object in the known universe, the human brain, requires approximately 8 hours of unconsciousness every night to clean itself, to survive, to remain itself. Every time you choose to sleep, you are running a program that evolution spent millions of years designing. Every time you skip it, you are making a withdrawal from an account that doesn't have unlimited funds. The science is no longer ambiguous. The glymphatic system is real. The beta-amyloid connection is documented. The Alzheimer's link is established. What we do with that knowledge, that's the question that belongs to us. Hans Berger, the man who started all of this, died in 1941. He never fully received the recognition his discovery deserved. But every sleep study ever conducted since, every REM measurement, every glymphatic scan, it all runs on the foundation he built alone, in a lab, while everyone else thought he was wasting his time. There is something worth sitting with in that. The most important thing your brain does might happen while you're not even aware it's happening. If this story changed how you think about sleep tonight, subscribe. We release one of these every week.